Jonathan Roumie has never been shy about his faith, but what he's been sharing in 22/6 goes deeper than anything he's said before. For years, we knew him as the Catholic actor who plays Jesus, the man who searches for the nearest church wherever he travels, the man who says he takes nothing for granted. But this year, Jonathan has been speaking about something more personal, more vulnerable, and honestly, more human. He's been talking about the weight of it, the actual, real, emotional, and spiritual weight of playing Jesus Christ, not just as a role, but as a calling he feels responsible for. In recent interviews and public appearances, Jonathan has opened up about the moments where he genuinely questions himself, where he sits alone after a long shooting day and wonders whether he's doing justice to the man he believes is his savior. He's described it as a kind of holy pressure, something that never fully goes away, no matter how many seasons pass or how much praise he receives. And what makes this so compelling is that most actors, when they talk about difficult roles, they talk about the craft, the research, the physicality, the emotional preparation. But Jonathan isn't just talking about craft. He's talking about his soul. He said that there are scenes, particularly the ones involving suffering, the ones where Jesus is alone, abandoned, misunderstood, that bring him to a place that goes beyond performance. He doesn't fully separate himself from those moments. He carries them. And in 2006, he's been more willing than ever to admit that. He's spoken about kneeling in prayer before, filming certain scenes, not as a ritual for the cameras, but because he genuinely felt like he needed to ask for something beyond himself to get through them. He's described moments on set that he can only call spiritual, where something shifted in the air, where the crew went quiet without being asked to, where he felt a presence that he can't explain in any other way except faith. Now you might be thinking, of course he says that. He's a devout Catholic playing Jesus. But what's interesting about Jonathan in 22/6 is that he's also being more honest about doubt, not doubting God, but doubt in himself. He's admitted that there are days where he feels completely unworthy of the role, not in a performative, humble way, but in a way that genuinely shakes him. He's said that he sometimes looks at the script and thinks, who am I to say these words? Who am I to stand here and represent this? And instead of pushing that feeling away, he's learned to sit with it, to let it humble him, to let it remind him that this is bigger than any one person, including himself. That kind of honesty is rare, especially from someone in his position, where the expectation is to always appear strong, always appear certain, always appear like the right man for the job. But Jonathan is choosing something different in 2026. He's choosing transparency. And what that does for the audience, for believers and non-believers alike, is it makes everything feel more real. Because when you see a man who genuinely believes in what he's portraying, who prays before he steps on set, who loses sleep over whether he's getting it right, you don't just watch the performance differently, you feel it differently. There's also something he said recently that has stayed with a lot of people. He was asked if he could have one conversation with Jesus, what would he ask? And without hesitating, he said he would ask, how did I do? Not as an actor, as a person, as someone trying to live up to something enormous. And that one answer tells you everything you need to know about where Jonathan Roumie stands in 2006. His faith isn't a background detail. It isn't a talking point. It is the foundation of everything he does, and he is more open about that now than he has ever been. What's also worth noting is the way Jonathan talks about the other cast members, many of whom don't share his faith background. He's never been dismissive or judgmental about that. In fact, he's spoken warmly about how the diversity of belief on set has actually deepened his own faith, rather than threatened it. He said that watching someone who doesn't personally believe in Jesus still treat the material with reverence and care has been one of the most unexpectedly moving experiences of his life. Because to him, it suggests that there's something in this story that reaches people regardless of where they stand spiritually. Something universal, something that goes beyond doctrine and denomination, and lands somewhere much more fundamental in the human experience. And in 22/6, Jonathan Roumie is more convinced of that than ever. Vanessa Bene has always been one of the most quietly compelling figures in the chosen conversation. Not because she's loud about her beliefs, but because she's so careful with her words. And in 2006, that carefulness has started to feel like something more than just privacy. It feels like someone who is genuinely still figuring things out, and who is brave. enough to say so without pretending otherwise. For a long time, fans have debated where Vanessa actually stands when it comes to faith. Some assumed she must be Christian simply because of how beautifully she portrays Mary, the mother of Jesus. Others speculated she might be agnostic or hold beliefs outside of Christianity entirely. And the truth is, Vanessa has never fully settled that debate. But what she has done in 22,000 is give us more windows into her inner world than she ever has before. And what you see through those windows is genuinely moving. In recent conversations, Vanessa has talked about what it means to carry Mary with her. Not just on set, not just during filming, but in her daily life. She's described a kind of quiet transformation that has happened in her over the course of the show, something she didn't expect, and something she says she's still trying to understand. She hasn't called it a religious conversion. She hasn't put a label on it, but she's acknowledged that playing this particular woman, this particular mother, has changed something fundamental in the way she sees herself and the world around her. And that is not a small thing to admit, especially when you're someone who has been careful about keeping your personal spiritual life out of the public eye. What Vanessa has been especially open about in 2006 is the emotional reality of certain scenes, particularly the ones involving loss, the ones where Mary watches her son suffer, the ones where she has to stand at the foot of the cross and hold herself together while everything she loves is being taken from her. Vanessa has said that those scenes don't feel like acting to her. They feel like something else entirely. She's described a moment during filming where she looked up and something in her broke open in a way she wasn't prepared for, not because she was forcing emotion, but because the story reached inside her and pulled something out that was already there. She's talked about how Mary's strength, her absolute refusal to abandon her son even in the worst moment of his life, has become something she personally draws from, not as a character choice, but as a real source of something she can only describe as spiritual strength. And here is what makes Vanessa's 2026 update so fascinating. She still hasn't labeled herself. She still hasn't stood up and declared a specific faith, or said I am this, or I believe that, in a definitive, boxed-in way. But the language she uses has shifted. There's a warmth in how she talks about Mary that goes beyond professional admiration. There's a tenderness that feels personal. And when she speaks about the idea of a woman who loved unconditionally, who stood firm in her faith even when everything around her collapsed, you get the sense that Vanessa isn't just describing a character anymore. She's describing something she's reaching toward herself. One of the most striking things she said recently was about the nature of belief itself. She talked about how she used to think that belief was something you either had or you didn't, something fixed. Either you're a person of faith or you're not. But playing Mary has complicated that idea for her in a way she finds beautiful rather than unsettling. She now thinks of belief as something more like a relationship, something that grows and changes, and sometimes goes quiet, and sometimes hits you all at once, in the middle of a scene when you least expect it. That is a profound thing to say, and it tells you that whatever Vanessa Bene's faith looks like right now, it is very much alive and very much in motion. There's also something she mentioned about the community that has formed around The Chosen that genuinely touched her. She talked about receiving messages from people all over the world, from different countries, different religions, different backgrounds, who all told her that watching her play Mary made them feel something they hadn't felt in years. Some said it reconnected them with their faith. Some said it helped them grieve. Some said it made them feel less alone. And Vanessa said that reading those messages changed the way she understood what she was doing. It stopped feeling like a job and started feeling like a responsibility, a sacred one. Even if she doesn't use that word lightly or often, she said it made her realize that art, real art, the kind that reaches people in the middle of their pain, doesn't belong to the artist. It passes through them. And whether or not she personally identifies with a specific religion, she believes that something was working through her in this role. Something bigger than her craft and bigger than her preparation. And in 2006, she's more willing to say that out loud than she has ever been before. Shahar Isaac, who plays Simon Peter, continues to be one of the most intriguing figures in the cast when it comes to questions of faith. Born and raised in Israel, coming from an Israeli Yemenite Jewish background, Shahar has always occupied a unique space within the Chosen universe. He's playing one of the most important figures in Christian history, a man whose entire life was transformed by his relationship with Jesus. And he's doing it as someone who comes from a completely different religious tradition. And in 22:6, Shahar has started to speak more openly about what that experience has actually been like from the inside. For a long time, the most discussed thing about Shahar online was a quote that circulated on Reddit, where he allegedly referred to the biblical characters as mythological. That quote caused a stir among fans, and understandably so, but as was pointed out before, that quote was never properly verified, the source was never confirmed, and without context, it's impossible to know what he actually meant or whether he even said it at all. What we do have in 22:6 is Shahar speaking for himself more directly. And what he's sharing is thoughtful, nuanced, and deeply human. He's talked about growing up Jewish and what the stories of the Torah meant to him as a child, how figures like Moses and David weren't abstract to him. They were real, they were part of his culture, his family, his identity. And then he found himself on a set portraying a man who walked alongside Jesus, who denied him 3 times and then spent the rest of his life trying to make that right. And Shahar has said that the emotional core of Simon Peter's story, the guilt, the redemption, the desperate need to be forgiven and to forgive yourself, is something that transcends any single religion. He said that those feelings are Jewish feelings, Christian feelings, human feelings. And playing Simon Peter has made him feel connected to something ancient and vast in a way that genuinely surprised him. Elizabeth Tabish has always been one of the most outspoken members of the chosen cast, and in 2026 that hasn't changed. If anything, she's become even more willing to go to places that other cast members tend to avoid. Places where faith and real life collide in uncomfortable, complicated, and sometimes painful ways. Elizabeth plays Mary Magdalene, one of the most misunderstood figures in the entire Bible, a woman who has been reduced, misrepresented, and unfairly defined by centuries of bad theology. And there's something fitting about the fact that the woman who plays her is also someone who refuses to be reduced or misrepresented when it comes to her own beliefs. Because Elizabeth Tabish is a Christian, but she's not the kind of Christian that a lot of people expect when they hear that word. And in 2026, she's been louder than ever about what that actually means to her. She's talked extensively about the tension she feels existing in a space where her faith and her politics don't fit the mold that most people have built in their heads. She's described the exhaustion of being a left-leaning Christian in a cultural moment where those two identities are treated as contradictions. She said that so many people she knows who share her faith have gone quiet about it publicly, not because they're ashamed, but because the word Christian has been so thoroughly claimed by a particular political identity that using it feels like signing up for a set of beliefs they don't hold. And Elizabeth refuses to go quiet. She's been clear that her faith is rooted in the Jesus she reads about in the Gospels, the one who sat with outcasts, the one who challenged power, the one who told the rich to give everything away and told the powerful to serve the powerless. And she sees that Jesus as deeply, radically political in a way that doesn't fit comfortably on either side of the modern political aisle. She said that playing Mary Magdalene has actually sharpened this conviction in her rather than softened it, because Mary Magdalene was herself someone who was pushed to the margins, someone who the establishment didn't take seriously, someone whose testimony was dismissed simply because of who she was. And Elizabeth has said that the more she understands Mary, the more she understands why Jesus chose her, not despite her position on the outside, but because of it. There's a courage in that reading of the story that feels very personal for Elizabeth. And in 22:6, she's applying it directly to her own life and her own voice. She's been speaking at events, engaging publicly on social issues, and using her platform in ways that make some fans uncomfortable and others feel genuinely seen. And she's been transparent about the fact that she knew taking a public position would cost her something in terms of audience goodwill. But she's said that staying silent would cost her more. Because for her, faith without action is just decoration. It looks nice, but it doesn't do anything. And that is not the faith she's built her life around. What's particularly fascinating about Elizabeth in 2026 is the way she talks about doubt alongside belief. She doesn't present her faith as something settled and finished. She's talked about the seasons of her life where God felt completely absent, where she looked at the world and struggled to reconcile what she saw with what she believed. And she said that those seasons didn't destroy her faith, they deepened it, because coming through them taught her that faith isn't about certainty. It's about continuing to reach even when you can't feel anything reaching back. That kind of honesty is rare in any public conversation about religion. And the fact that she's willing to offer it while also being publicly political and openly Christian makes her one of the most genuinely interesting voices in the entire chosen cast. Noah James, who plays Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, has also been sharing more of himself in 2026 than he has in previous years. Noah is Jewish, and like Shahar Isaac, he brings a personal, cultural, and spiritual connection to the world of the show that goes beyond research or preparation. For Noah, these stories are not foreign. They're familiar in the deepest possible sense. They're part of the tradition he was raised in, the holidays he celebrated, the values he was taught as a child. And playing Andrew, a Jewish fisherman who drops everything to follow an itinerant rabbi from Galilee, has given Noah a way to connect with that tradition from a completely new angle. He's talked about filming the Sermon on the Mount as one of the most quietly powerful experiences of his life, not because he converted or had some dramatic spiritual awakening on set, but because standing there, in the middle of that scene, surrounded by hundreds of people listening to words that have echoed through centuries, he felt something click, a recognition, like he was touching something real and ancient that had always been there waiting for him to find it. And in 2200, Noah has been more reflective about what that recognition means for him personally. He's talked about the way his Jewish background actually gave him access to Andrew's inner world in a way that a different background might not have. Because Andrew wasn't following a Christian, he was following a Jewish teacher. And understanding that, feeling that in his bones rather than just reading it in a history book, gave his performance a texture and an authenticity that he's incredibly proud of. He's also spoken about the emotional demands of Season 4 and beyond, and how the themes of surrender and trust that run through Andrew's story have started to bleed into his real life in ways he didn't anticipate. He's said that there's something about repeatedly embodying a person who chose to let go, who chose to follow rather than control, that starts to change the way you move through your own life. It loosens something in you, and Noah has said that he's grateful for that loosening, that it's made him a better actor, a better friend, and a more present human being. Paris Patel continues to be one of the most quietly compelling members of the cast when it comes to questions of faith. Raised Hindu, Paris has always been careful about drawing clear lines around his personal beliefs. He keeps that part of his life relatively private, which is something that deserves respect rather than speculation. But in 2206, there are things he's been willing to say that give us a clearer picture than we've had before. Paris plays Matthew, and one of the most celebrated aspects of his performance is the way he portrays Matthew as someone on the autism spectrum. It's a creative choice that has resonated deeply with audiences, particularly with people who have autistic family members or who are themselves autistic. And Paris has spoken about the responsibility he feels in carrying that portrayal with honesty and care. But what he's also spoken about, and this is where it gets genuinely moving, is the sense of purpose that has settled over him through this role. He's described a feeling that goes beyond professional satisfaction, something that feels, in his